Okay, so today we're picking up with the Macedonians. If you remember in the last video, I talked about how the Greeks were too busy fighting amongst themselves to see the threat that was coming in. And that threat is going to be the Macedonians. Now, the Greeks knew about the Macedonians, but they didn't consider them to be a threat until it was too late. So, the Greeks saw the Macedonians as being these northern barbarians, that they were very rural, they didn't have cities, they were nomadic, they were divided up into tribes, and so they weren't seen as a threat. However, the Macedonians will eventually get a ruler called Philip II, and Philip II is going to build up his military. He's going to build up the size of his army, he's going to build up its strength. And as he begins to approach the Greek peninsula, the Greeks have a lot of mixed reactions to him. Some of them are going to join forces with him, and others are going to have to be conquered. So it's kind of a depending on who you were and if you were willing to work with this guy, how it worked out. But eventually he gets into all of Greece, and the remaining Greeks are going to rise up against him, and they fight the Battle of Chaeronea. And so Chaeronea is the final battle where the Greeks are defeated, the Macedonians take over. So the Macedonians, Philip takes over. It's the end of the polis system, but the Greeks weren't like completely dominated. They still had some independence. They still had the ability to make some decisions, but it ends those Greek rivalries. They're not going to fight amongst each other because Philip wasn't going to put up with it. He just said, this isn't going to happen. His main goal was to get into Persia. So he wants to go take over that area. So he's trying to expand even more. And unfortunately, before that can be accomplished, he's attending one of his daughter's weddings, and he's assassinated at the wedding. And so Philip is not ever going to achieve his dream of taking over Persia. But his son is going to take over after him, and he wants to carry out his father's dream. Now, Alexander was his son, and Alexander was only 20 when he takes power, and eventually he's going to earn the name of Alexander the Great. But in the beginning of his rule, he wasn't known as Alexander the Great. It's not until he does great things that he's going to be known as Alexander the Great. So, Alexander had been prepared to be king, maybe not so soon, but he had been put into positions that put him in charge, like he was put in charge of the cavalry, and he had been busy protecting the borders and putting down rebellions and spying on Persia. So it's not like it was anything new to him, like he wasn't ready for it. He was ready for it. But Alexander has his own vision as well as his father's dream to accomplish. And his grand vision was that he was going to create a whole new empire that would be different from anywhere else or anything in history or anything to come. And he had very positive expectations for this. He really truly believed in it, but he didn't have a whole lot of money, which was kind of a problem, because in order to make war on people, you kind of need to have money. And he didn't have a very large army. I mean, it had been built up, and conquering the Greeks had helped. It had built that up as well, but not enough to take on the rest of the world, kind of thing. So he needed to be able to build that up. So the answer to both those problems of not having money and not having enough men is going out and conquering more territory, because you get all of its goods, plus you can get soldiers that way. The defeated armies you can allow to come into your army, so that you give them a choice. You either kill them or they join you, one of the two. And so he decides to go conquering. And so he begins in 334. In 334, he's going to cross the Granicus River. And by crossing the Granicus River, he overtakes some Persian outposts. So he's beginning to accomplish his father's dream. 333, just a year later, he has taken over all of Western Asia Minor, which includes Turkey, which is the Persian Empire. Another year, and he in 332 has gotten into Syria and Palestine and Egypt, and so now he's moving into the Middle East. Alexander is going to take over Egypt, and the Egyptians are going to make him their pharaoh. He's going to found the city of Alexandria as well while he's there, so he's kind of a busy guy. And then in 331, just another year later, he takes over Babylon, which is in Mesopotamia, and he finishes off the rest of Persia. And this is kind of a key event because Babylon has an enormous treasury, lots and lots of money. I mean, he's going to be rolling in it. And so Babylon is going to become his new capital city. It's his favorite city, and eventually it'll be where he dies later on. The next year, in 330 BCE, he decides that he needs to get rid of the Persian king because he defeated the rest of Persia, but the Persian king wants it back. So he decides, well, I need to go and assassinate him and go kill him. And so he goes on this quest to kill King Darius III. But before Alexander can get there, the king is assassinated. So kind of a waste of time for him, except that when he arrives and finds out that the king is assassinated, the Persians make him their king. So he becomes the king of the Persians. He's the pharaoh of Egypt. He's the ruler of Macedonia. Now he's also the king of the Persians. So he sits there for a little while and decides that his next target is going to be India. So his next target is to go take over India in 327. However, by this point, his soldiers are tired of fighting, and so they stage this little rebellion to basically tell Alexander, enough's enough, we're tired of fighting, we want to go home and have families, and they're just tired of this long campaign. They'd been on the road for like 6 or 7, or actually more than that, about 8 years. So they were tired of this. And so Alexander, being the great man that he is, actually listened to his soldiers and decided to turn home. Did not take over India. And so on the trip home, they stop over in Babylon, his capital city, and that is where Alexander will die in 323. Now, there's a lot of debate as to how he dies. There's some evidence that suggests that he had been wounded in battle. The guy had been fighting for several years and had wounds that had never healed properly. So that possibly could have been how he died. Another hypothesis is that it was just extreme exhaustion. He'd been on the move for over 10 years. And so possibly it was just plain exhaustion. His body wore out. His heart wore out. There's another possible explanation for his death was that it was alcohol poisoning, that perhaps he had drank too much in celebration, and so by pure chance of fate he died due to alcohol poisoning. So lots of different stories out there about how he died, but regardless of how he died, what's kind of more important is the man himself and what he accomplished. His self-image of himself, there's a lot of historians out there that debate his impact. Some say he was a visionary, that he had these wonderful ideals and got some of them accomplished. Others say that he was just a dictator, that it was his way or the highway. So it's kind of a mixture of both. What we do know is that from historians who have researched Alexander is that Alexander really held Achilles as his model, that Achilles in the Iliad was so courageous and so brave that that's who he wanted to be like. He wanted to embody that. Others have argued that, well, maybe not so much Achilles, but he really saw himself as being a descendant of Hercules, that he was part god. And some of that can be justified, that, you know, the pharaohs made him, or the Egyptians made him pharaoh, and according to the Egyptians, the pharaoh is part god. And so, you know, if he says to the rest of his empire that I'm part god, then they're going to assume that he's part of a Greek god, not an Egyptian god. So anyway, so he's just a very interesting individual. You know, was he egotistical? Did he see himself as a god, or did he see himself as being a benefit to the people around him? So kind of different things. Anyway, so Alexander's achievements, what did he actually get done for the Macedonians? Excuse me. Well, he did create this international army where men from different cultures got along and fought side by side. He had a plan for fusing the cultures together, of making them a unified empire, and he did that by encouraging his soldiers to marry women from other cultures to get that mix. And he really wanted to create an ecumenical culture. And an ecumenical culture is a culture of diverse people who have been unified together. And so that was really what he was trying to focus on. However, after his death, his vision sort of fizzles out. It doesn't hold true. And so there's going to be a struggle for power among his generals. He didn't have a son to take over after him. He was kind of too busy fighting to create any sons. And so his generals are going to be fighting for power. And he had 4 generals, and they're going to split up his empire, and each is going to control their own area. And so you have Antigonid, who is going to be in Macedonia. You have Seleucid, who will be in Syria and Egypt. And then you have Pergamum, who's going to be in Asia Minor, and Ptolemy, who will be in Egypt. And at first, it provides stability, and there's some semblance of order, and that they're going to be able to hold it together, but that's not going to last very long. But the influences that Alexander had is that he did help to spread the language and ideas and culture of the Greeks to many, many other people that probably would never have converted to these kinds of things. And among those things that were converted included the Greek religion. Religion was a heavy part of people's lives at this time, and each of the polises had temples that, you remember, they had an attachment to a god or goddess, and rituals and prayers, sacrifice, gifts, all kinds of stuff. The Olympic festival will rise out of the Greek religion. And they truly believed in the will of the gods, that the gods would send them omens or signs of what to do. They had oracles where it would be a prophet who would tell them what the gods wanted. So kind of an interesting religion. It's polytheistic, meaning many gods and goddesses. We're going to look at the gods and goddesses. There were 12 gods on Mount Olympus that lived on Mount Olympus, and one who did not, because he didn't live on the mountain. You had Zeus, who was the father of the gods. Hera is his wife, and she's the mother of the gods. You had Poseidon, who was Zeus's brother, and he's the god of the seas, but he's also the god of earthquakes. Hestia is Zeus's sister, and she's the goddess of the home or the hearth. Demeter is also Zeus's sister, and she was the goddess of agriculture and farming. Hades was Zeus's brother, and he's the god of the underworld. He's the god of the dead, and he's the one that doesn't live on Mount Olympus. And then you had the children of Zeus, and Aphrodite, who is the goddess of love and beauty. Apollo, who is the god of sun and music. Ares, who was the god of war. Artemis, who is the goddess of the moon and the hunt. Athena, who is the goddess of wisdom and the arts. Hephaestus, who is the god of fire and metal. And Hermes, who is the messenger of the gods. He's also the god of trade as well. So those are the main gods that you're going to need to know, and we're going to be doing some activities in class to learn a little bit more about them. But that's just a real quick rundown of who they are. So that's where we'll end today.